The moment you go silent, something subtle but extremely powerful begins to happen inside her mind. Most men believe attraction is built only through constant attention, nonstop texting, and always being available. But psychology teaches us something very different. Human beings rarely become emotionally attached to what feels guaranteed. We become attached to what creates emotional movement inside us: curiosity, uncertainty, anticipation, and reflection. And silence, when it comes from emotional control instead of insecurity, creates all four. During the first few days, she notices the shift immediately. Maybe she was used to your daily messages, your reactions to her stories, your consistent presence. Even if she never openly admitted it, your attention became part of her emotional routine, and the human brain is deeply affected when routines suddenly disappear. This is why silence feels so loud. It interrupts certainty. Now understand this carefully. Her mind does not instantly conclude that you disappeared because you are weak or desperate. In fact, the opposite often happens when your silence feels calm and intentional. She starts searching for meaning. Why did he pull back? Did something change? Is he focused on himself? These questions matter because attraction grows in the space where certainty ends and imagination begins. Most men destroy this effect because they panic too early. They send another message. They over-explain. They chase reassurance, but the man who remains emotionally composed communicates something rare: self-control. And self-control has always been psychologically attractive because it signals value. People assume that someone who can comfortably detach from constant validation must have a strong inner world. This is where philosophy enters the conversation. The ancient Stoics often spoke about emotional discipline, the ability to remain grounded instead of reacting impulsively. Silence is powerful not because it manipulates another person, but because it forces you to confront your own emotional dependence. When you stop chasing immediate responses, you reclaim your attention, and strangely enough, that inner stability becomes magnetic. Meanwhile, her mind begins replaying interactions. She remembers your tone, your energy, the emotional moments you shared. Absence sharpens memory. This is a psychological principle seen everywhere in human behavior. People often fail to appreciate something fully while it is constantly available. But once access becomes uncertain, perception changes, value increases, and here is the deeper truth most people never realize: silence creates contrast. If everyone else is competing for attention, explaining themselves endlessly, and begging to be noticed, the person who can step back calmly stands out immediately. Your silence separates you from emotional noise, but this only works when the silence is genuine. If it comes from bitterness, manipulation, or emotional games, people eventually feel that energy. Real silence is not punishment, it is presence directed inward. It is a man returning his focus to his purpose, his growth, his discipline, and his peace. Because in the end, the strongest presence in any room is often the person who does not need to prove they matter. After several days of silence, something even more intense begins to happen. What started as curiosity slowly transforms into emotional imagination. And this is the stage most men completely misunderstand. They assume attraction fades when communication slows down. But emotionally, the human mind often moves in the opposite direction. When certainty disappears, imagination fills the empty space. And imagination is far more powerful than reality. This is why silence can become emotionally overwhelming. She no longer reacts only to your actions, she starts reacting to the story her mind creates about you. Every unanswered question gains emotional weight. Why is he so calm? Why hasn't he reached out? Did he lose interest? Is he becoming distant because he's evolving? The mind naturally searches for explanations when emotional patterns suddenly change, and the less information she has, the more emotionally involved she becomes in finding answers. Psychologists understand this very well. The brain is wired to seek closure. Unfinished emotional situations remain active in the subconscious much longer than completed ones. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect. People remember interrupted emotional experiences more intensely than resolved ones. In simple terms, when your presence suddenly becomes uncertain, your emotional imprint often becomes stronger, not weaker. Now notice the deeper dynamic here. Most men believe attraction is created by saying more, proving more, or constantly reminding a woman of their value. But real emotional impact rarely comes from force. It comes from emotional contrast. When you disappear from the constant stream of attention she expected, your absence becomes psychologically visible. She begins comparing your silence to the noise of everyone else. And this is where mystery enters the picture. Mystery is not pretending to be cold or unavailable. It is the natural result of a man who is fully occupied by his purpose instead of consumed by emotional dependency. There is something deeply attractive about a person who does not revolve their entire emotional world around another human being. It communicates strength, direction, and inner stability. At this stage, her emotions become more internalized. She may start revisiting old conversations, replaying your voice in her mind, checking your social media more often than before, or wondering what you are doing without her knowledge. Why? Because emotional uncertainty intensifies focus. The human mind becomes obsessed with what it cannot fully predict or control. But there is also a philosophical lesson hidden inside this. Silence reveals emotional truth. When you stop overperforming for attention, you begin seeing who truly values your presence. Many people only recognize emotional connection when they are forced to experience its absence, and this applies to life far beyond relationships. Human beings often wake up emotionally only after comfort disappears. That is why emotional discipline matters so much. The man who constantly reacts emotionally becomes predictable, but the man who can remain calm without becoming bitter develops a quiet kind of power. Not loud power, not manipulative power, psychological presence, and ironically, the less desperate you become for validation, the more unforgettable your energy feels to others. Because people are drawn toward those who appear emotionally complete within themselves. Never forget this. When your silence is backed by purpose, self-respect, and emotional control, it stops being silence. It becomes presence without words. After enough time passes, the silence stops feeling temporary in her mind, and this is where the emotional experience becomes truly real for her. What began as curiosity then turned into imagination, now transforms into the fear of losing access to you completely. This is the stage where absence becomes emotional reality. Understand something important about human psychology. People rarely measure value accurately while they still feel guaranteed access to it. Familiarity creates emotional blindness. We assume certain people will always be there, always available, always reachable. But the moment that certainty disappears, perception changes immediately. The mind begins reevaluating what it may have underestimated. This is why your silence can suddenly feel heavier after a week or more. At first, she may have believed you would eventually return exactly as before. But as time continues, another thought quietly enters her mind. What if he's actually moving on? And that possibility changes everything emotionally. Now she starts noticing your absence in ordinary moments. A song reminds her of you. A memory reappears unexpectedly. She checks her phone more often than usual. She may revisit old conversations, look through your social media, or wonder if another woman is now receiving the attention she once had access to. This is not just emotional attachment. This is the human fear of replacement, and psychologically, the fear of losing something valuable is often stronger than the pleasure of having it. Behavioral psychology calls this loss aversion. Human beings are more emotionally affected by the possibility of losing value than by gaining it. And when your energy, attention, and emotional presence suddenly become unavailable, your value can intensify in her mind because scarcity changes perception. But this is where many men make a dangerous mistake. They hear this idea and immediately turn silence into manipulation. They use distance to create anxiety, reactions, or control. And the problem is that manipulative silence always carries emotional instability underneath it. Eventually, people feel that energy, real emotional power, never comes from trying to control another person's emotions. It comes from mastering your own. That is the deeper lesson here. The strongest men are not the ones who play games best. They are the ones who genuinely build a life so meaningful that they no longer depend on constant validation to feel worthy. When your attention becomes valuable, your absence naturally becomes noticeable, and this is why purpose matters so much. A man focused on growth, discipline, health, ambition, and inner peace carries a different emotional energy. His silence feels different because it is not empty, it is filled with direction. People can sense when someone is disappearing because they are bitter and when someone is simply evolving. Over time, she begins recognizing something profound. Your value was never just in your words, your messages, or your attention. It was in your emotional presence. And once that presence is gone, the emotional space you occupied becomes impossible to ignore. In the end, silence is not about making someone suffer. It is about becoming someone whose absence speaks louder than constant attention ever could.